Hey, my mom's worked in an office her whole life, so these stories hit close to home. This isn't just content for use, it's about real people, real choices. Everything here is fictionalized. Names, companies, all of it. But the message, that's very real. Let's make sure no one repeats her mistakes.
The second I saw my name missing from the quarterly compliance review list, I knew something was off. Not just a clerical error or some intern's oopsie. This was intentional, calculated. The kind of omission that doesn't happen by accident when you've been running regulatory clearances longer than most of these execs have had a LinkedIn account. I didn't say anything at first, just watched, waited, took note of who avoided eye contact, who suddenly forgot I existed in meetings I'd practically built from scratch. By the time they reassigned 3 of my vendor contracts, ones I'd managed for over a decade, I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just quiet. The same kind of quiet that comes right before a tornado pulls the roof off. You don't scream, you don't panic, you just notice. And in that noticing, something starts to shift. Hey, quick thing before we go any deeper. If you're listening and you haven't hit subscribe yet, go ahead and do that now. Seriously, 97% of people who hear stories like this don't subscribe, and it really helps the team keep bringing more of these to life. Smash that like button too if you've ever had your work erased with a smile. All right, back in. They called me the line holder. Not to my face, of course. But behind closed doors, I knew the nickname floated around. Because when chaos came knocking, whether it was the FAA breathing down our neck or a 30mm vendor botching delivery, I held the line. I didn't need applause. I needed clean processes, correct timestamps, and contracts that wouldn't buckle under audit. That was my power. Invisible. Unshakable. I worked out of Kansas City, but Calderon's reach was global. That meant my inbox pinged with issues from Singapore at 2 a.m., then again from Frankfurt by dawn. I didn't complain. I made it work. I handled cross-border procurement reviews, regulatory certifications for high-risk aircraft components, and every godforsaken revision clause you can imagine. I didn't do drama. I did documentation. When the India office had a sudden compliance flare-up that threatened a 12.6 shipment delay, I rewrote their response letter line by line from my kitchen table. When the EU division forgot to account for new post-Brexit supply chain protocols, I rebuilt their framework and handed it off with a bow. I was the kind of person you don't notice until something explodes. But here's the thing. They stopped noticing even before anything exploded. That's when I started keeping a different kind of record. Not just contract logs or approval trails, but names, dates, edits, whispered decisions that didn't loop me in. A pattern of being left out by design. My badge still worked. My calendar still said Senior Compliance Advisor. But the air had shifted. People used to come to me with, "Can you double check this?" Now it was legal already signed off, with a polite smile that shut the door in my face. And then came Lexi, fresh from some tech firm with a ping-pong table and kombucha on tap. HR director with more enthusiasm than insight, who thought my silence meant I was docile. The first week she was there, she sent out a reorg teaser newsletter, complete with stock photo grins and phrases like streamlining talent allocation. I wasn't mentioned, but I wasn't stupid either. She talked about the future of lean compliance. And every time she did, someone from my side of the org chart got shuffled, renamed, or just disappeared altogether. That's how it starts. They don't fire the anchor. They just start cutting the rope, one thread at a time. So I stopped volunteering ideas, stopped correcting Lexi's misuse of audit terminology in meetings, let her flounder in front of the CFO when she misquoted an FAA clause I practically had tattooed on my spine. And in the quiet, I started preparing. Not for war. Not yet. But for the moment, they'd forget who wrote the rulebook. March 3rd. That was the day my name vanished from the budget review invites like it had never belonged there. No warning, no, hey, we're switching things up, just gone. Same for the compliance huddles I used to lead. My weekly briefing doc, the one I'd built and refined for 10 straight years, came back to me rewritten, sloppily, by 2 junior analysts who couldn't tell a procedural deviation from a post-it note. I watched them butcher a vendor flag protocol like it was a mad lib. No one asked for my input. No one even seed me. And then Lexi started saying the word, like it meant progress. Realignment. Realignment. My ass. That word doesn't bring growth. It brings boxes. It brings whispers. It brings a Friday afternoon meeting with an unexpected opportunity stapled to a non-compete. It was never subtle, but it was fast. She brought in a consultancy group from out west, all slides and strategy buzzwords. They had slick hair, startup sneakers, and expressions like they were allergic to accountability. I watched them present a workforce optimization plan to leadership, and while I wasn't directly named, I wasn't on any of their little workflow webs either. It was the silence that said everything. Still, I could have written it out. I've been through shifts before. New managers, new org charts, the occasional idiot with a whiteboard who thinks he invented efficiency. But this time, I found something they didn't expect me to see. Buried in the shared HR folder, badly permissioned no less, was a PDF called Q2 Transition Strategy. Lexi had uploaded it the week prior. Inside, a checklist. Step 4 stopped me cold. Voluntary resignation preferred. Use pressure tactics if necessary. Pressure tactics, like cutting someone off from their workflows, like quietly removing names from meeting rosters, like having interns rewrite your audit language just to humiliate you. I read it twice, then downloaded the file, time-stamped it, saved it in a backup folder off network. I wasn't the target of a realignment. I was the subject of a campaign, so I pivoted. I stopped reviewing vendor contracts that week and started reviewing my own. And what I found made me sit up straighter. My employment agreement had been revised back in 2017, after Calderon almost got swallowed in a hostile bid. Legal had updated my protections to retain core compliance leadership. Nobody remembered that now, but I did. Page 17, Section 6.4c. If the employee resigns following employer-initiated pressure, coercion, or procedural deviation from standard offboarding policy, said resignation shall be treated as employer-initiated termination. Termination meant 18 months base salary, full vesting of outstanding equity, and a $60,000 transition bonus. Resignation meant, thanks for your time. Here's a mug. And here's the kicker. The clause included one caveat that the resignation would only be considered valid upon final settlement of all contractual and compensation obligations. In plain English, I could resign, but unless they met every single condition tied to a formal termination, it wouldn't legally count. My employment would still be active on paper, and if they breached, that opened up a whole other chain of penalties buried in the appendix, but none of that mattered. Unless they pushed, unless they tried to stage me, as if I walked away of my own volition. That's when I started taking notes. Not mental ones, written, time-stamped, witnessed. I logged changes to my permissions, emails with wording that stunk of setup, and even hallway comments from Lexi like, "We'd love if she opted for a graceful exit." Graceful for who, exactly? My new full-time job wasn't compliance anymore. It was war prep, quiet, legal, immaculately documented. They thought I was the kind of person who folds politely. They didn't understand the danger of a woman who knows her own paperwork better than their lawyers do. Tuesday morning felt like walking into a dentist's office where the Novocaines already failed. The conference room was done up like some sterile negotiation chamber, glass walls, little tray of untouched pastries, 2 mugs of untouched coffee. A paper plant in the corner tried to look alive. Lexi was already there, sitting with her back straight like she'd been rehearsing this in front of a mirror. "Hey," she said with that sugary edge HR loves to weaponize. "Thanks for coming on short notice. We just wanted to have a quick conversation about your future here." Not our future, my future. There was a folder waiting in front of her, cream-colored, labeled with my name like it was a manila tombstone. She slid it across like she was offering me a new life. "After 22 years, she said, smiling just wide enough to show it wasn't real, "we thought it best that you decide how to exit, on your own terms." On my own terms, like the polite executioner offering you a choice of poison. I opened the folder. Inside, a pre-written resignation letter, my name filled in, a blank line for signature. The language was sanitized corporate death, thankful for the opportunity, seeking new challenges, parting on good terms. I let the silence stretch, held her in it. I could feel her wanting it to end. She expected me to just sign and spare her the awkwardness. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the single sheet I had typed and printed the night before. It was plain. No letterhead. No gratitude. Just one line. I hereby resign, effective upon final settlement of all contractual and compensation obligations. Lexi blinked at it, like she'd just been handed something radioactive. That's unusual, she said. I looked her dead in the eye. So was this meeting. I dated it, signed it, slid it across the table. She picked it up like it might bite her, scanned it. Her mouth pressed into a thin line, but she was trying to hold the poker face. HR 101, don't react. Don't ask questions you don't know the answer to. Okay, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We'll get that processed. Sure you will. What she didn't know, what no one in that building remembered, was that I helped draft the very language in our employment templates. That clause wasn't a formality, it was a detonation cord, tied to a minefield of obligations they thought they'd dodged by getting me to resign voluntarily. They'd just accepted a resignation that legally wasn't effective. Not until every last cent, share, and post-employment bonus was cleared and documented. And if they didn't settle, then the resignation never took effect. And I was still, in the eyes of policy, a current employee subject to all the protections and penalties of forced termination. Lexi looked almost triumphant as I stood and pushed my chair in. Thanks for handling this with grace, she said. I paused at the door. This isn't grace, I replied. This is structure. She thought she'd witnessed a clean break, but I'd just loaded the chamber, and they'd handed me the gun. Friday morning, 9:13 a.m., my phone lit up with a number I recognized but hadn't heard from in years. Calderon's internal counsel line. I let it buzz twice before answering. Not out of pettiness, out of poise. You don't rush when you're holding the clean end of the rope. Hi, this is Dana Walker, the voice said, clipped and brittle, like someone trying very hard not to sound like they'd been caught with their pants down. From legal. We're reviewing your resignation letter, and there's a phrase we need clarification on. I already knew what was coming, but I waited. When you wrote, quote, effective upon final settlement of all contractual and compensation obligations, what specifically were you referencing? I let a single beat pass, not long, just enough for discomfort to settle in. My employment agreement, I said evenly. Section 6.4c. Company obligations aren't considered settled until full payout, equity vesting, and final bonuses are documented and disbursed. So until those are completed, my resignation isn't active. Dead silence. Not even a paper shuffle. Then came the classic legal stall. We'll need to follow up. Click. No apology, no argument, just the kind of silence that suggests someone's about to sprint down the hallway screaming for a PDF. I set the phone down gently and went back to my coffee. Vanilla hazelnut. No sugar, just the way I liked it on days when the world finally caught up to me. At 11:46 a.m., a text buzzed through from Marcus in finance, an old friend who owed me at least 3 favors and a bourbon. CFO just turned white, the message read. Legal missed it. Everyone missed it. I didn't reply right away, just stared at the words for a while, letting them soak in. Not because I was surprised, because I wasn't. They thought they'd orchestrated a clean sweep, tucked me into a corner, handed me a script, and assumed I'd play nice. But they'd skipped the part where I'd reviewed every contract revision since 2011, where I'd negotiated my own clause in a post-acquisition panic when half the leadership was too distracted to notice what I'd slipped into the red lines, where I'd made sure, after watching colleagues get realigned out of their pensions, that my exit would be the costliest move they'd make. And now? Now the CFO was pale and legal was combing through documents they should have read before trying to box me out. They wanted a fast, quiet exit. Instead, they activated a trap door under their own feet. And the best part? I didn't have to say a word. The clause was doing all the talking. Lexi must have thought she could rewrite history with a few carefully cropped email forwards. Suddenly, legal was getting context emails from her about how I'd expressed openness to transition and indicated a desire to explore new directions. It was a fiction she'd constructed with just enough buzzwords to sound plausible to someone who didn't know better. But I wasn't just someone. The thing about working in compliance for 2 decades is you don't delete anything. You archive, you tag, you timestamp, you log metadata like your life depends on it because sometimes it does. And when Lexi decided to curate her narrative, she forgot who built the system that logs edits, forwards, even hover times. Her biggest mistake wasn't trying to lie, it was assuming I hadn't already built a case. 3 days before our little coffee chat, her assistant had sent me an internal meeting invite. Nothing unusual. But attached was a message I doubt Lexi even knew about. Per Lexi's instruction, please come prepared to sign your resignation today. That line alone shredded the whole voluntary angle like tissue paper in a monsoon. I had the original, the timestamp, the message ID, and the entire header chain preserved in .eml format because I knew better than to trust screenshots. I didn't panic. I documented. Every time I was excluded from a meeting, logged. Every time someone accidentally sent me a redacted file, logged. Every note, every nudge, every strategic cold shoulder, cataloged, organized, tagged. I built a folder called Exit Materials. Inside were 12 emails, 6 Slack threads, and 1 meeting memo with Lexi's name on it, asking HR to begin transition prep for my role. Not post-exit, pre-exit. Then came the audit log, my favorite part. I exported the chain from our internal communication suite showing how Lexi's forwarded emails had been edited, cropped headers, deleted timestamps. One even had the forwarded by tag scrubbed manually. The software I helped pick 10 years ago flagged every one of those edits. She was trying to pass off a resignation she had orchestrated as something I came to willingly. But the system, my system, had a memory longer than her career. I built a summary sheet, just for clarity. 1 page, plain language, every manipulation labeled, every piece of context intact. No emotion, no accusation, just facts. Because the goal wasn't revenge, it was accuracy. Voluntary? Only if you count coercion wrapped in croissants and HR jargon. And once legal saw the assistant's email, they'd realize they hadn't been building a case against me. They'd been handing me evidence for mine. By the time legal pulled my contract, the damage was already done. They'd spent days scrambling, trading Slack messages with timestamps that glowed like panic, combing through SharePoint folders they didn't even know existed last week. I imagined Dana, the associate counsel who'd called me earlier, hunched over her keyboard, eyes bloodshot, flipping through the digital ruins of a contract she never bothered to read until it was already detonated. Clause 6.4c wasn't some boilerplate language. It wasn't one of those filler sections HR tosses in for optics. It was mine. Handcrafted during the acquisition mess in 2016 when Calderon was nearly devoured by a European holding firm with a fondness for golden parachutes and zero interest in keeping legacy staff. Back then, I saw colleagues, brilliant, loyal people, walk out with pink slips and nothing else. No safety nets, no equity, just stunned expressions and a $20 coffee gift card. I didn't cry. I got smart. When they offered me a retention adjustment to stay through the transition, I nodded, smiled, and walked straight to legal with a list of amendments. Clause 6.4c was born that week. We fought over every line. And now, it read with the clarity of a guillotine, if the employee resigns following direct employer-initiated pressure, coercion, or procedural missteps, the resignation shall be deemed equivalent to company-initiated termination. It went further. Upon such classification, the employer is obligated to render 18 months of base salary at current compensation level, full vesting of all equity instruments regardless of vesting schedule, a transition bonus of $60,000 payable within 21 business days of effective date. And there it was again, in ink that couldn't be erased by PR spin or reorg memos, resignation to be considered effective only upon full settlement of all contractual and compensation obligations. I wasn't gone. Not until they paid every cent. Not until the equity hit. Not until the $60K was wired. And until then, I was still an employee on paper, fully protected with a resignation that functioned like a loaded bear trap. They couldn't fire me without cause, because I'd already resigned. but they couldn't not pay me either, because the resignation only counted once they met every single condition. They tried to play chess with someone who'd written the rule book for the board, and they triggered the one clause they'd never seen coming, because they never imagined someone like me could outwrite them, outweight them, and outthink them from the inside. The lawyers could huddle. The CFO could panic. Lexi could scramble to reframe. It didn't matter. They didn't need to understand the clause. They'd already agreed to it, and now they were bound to pay for every step they'd taken toward my voluntary goodbye. Their story said I walked away. But the contract? The contract said otherwise. Monday morning, 8:01 a.m. sharp, the package went out. Not by courier, by email. My attorney, Maureen, grit in a silk blouse, sent it directly to Calderon's legal counsel and just for good measure CC'd the CFO. No fancy legalese, no threats. Just 5 attachments and one line that hit harder than any cease and desist. The attachments were surgical. First, my full employment agreement annotated with clause 6.4c, highlighted like a flare in the night. Second, my resignation letter, 1 sentence long, clean, final, and completely conditional. Third, the original email from Lexi's assistant confirming I was expected to sign a resignation letter per Lexi's instruction, complete with timestamps and delivery headers intact. Fourth, screenshots of the Slack conversation where Lexi mentioned removing resistance quietly. That one had a special place in my heart. And fifth, a 2-page internal memo I had authored myself years earlier, outlining Calderon's audit classification tiers. It detailed precisely how pressure tactics invalidate voluntary exits. It bore a signature from a former VP and a timestamp from our own compliance system. In their own words, by their own definitions, I had been coerced. Maureen didn't editorialize, she didn't need to. At the bottom of the email, just one line. Please advise when all final settlement terms will be executed. As stipulated in clause 6.4c, resignation is not valid until obligations are fulfilled. No bluff, no threat, just structure. I imagined the room when that email hit. CFO pacing in socked feet, legal team blinking at PDF footers they'd never noticed before, Lexi maybe still believing it was all fixable, that a handshake and a new LinkedIn post could scrub $640,000 from the books. By 10:47 a.m., they replied, "You are correct. We acknowledge Section 6.4c is triggered. No, we're reviewing, no pending clarification, just one flat statement. A white flag dressed in Helvetica. And there it was. 18 months of salary, every last stock unit, the $60,000 transition bonus, fully triggered, no appeals, no arbitration, just numbers on a spreadsheet that now belong to me. It wasn't a settlement. It was fulfillment of their agreement, of my preparation. They wanted quiet. Instead, they got clarity. And the best part? Everything they'd done to try and avoid paying me, every whisper, every shady forward, every internal nudge, they'd only built my case stronger. This wasn't revenge. This was receipt. The call came at 8:22 p.m., long after business hours, long after the damage was already priced and processed. I almost didn't answer, but I wanted to hear it. Her voice, not the polished HR patter she used in boardrooms, the real tone. The one that creeps in when a plan unravels and there's no PowerPoint left to hide behind. "Hi," Lexi said, soft and breathy, like we were old friends catching up instead of co-authors of a very expensive mistake. "I hope this isn't too late to call." It was, but I didn't say that. "We've been revisiting some of the circumstances," she continued. "There might be an opportunity to reframe things, maybe a part-time advisory setup. Keep your institutional knowledge in-house, just a conversation." She was grasping, trying to patch over a self-inflicted wound with the duct tape of professional courtesy. If I agreed, it would let them rewrite the ending. Make it look collaborative, mutually beneficial, a warm handshake instead of a contractual hammer. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just asked, "Is your legal team still reviewing clause 6.4c? There was a pause, the kind where you can hear someone calculating in real time whether to lie. "Yes," she admitted. "Then we're done." That was it. No raised voice, no slammed phone, just precision. 3 days later, a payout letter landed in my inbox. All terms met. No red lines, no resistance, just a flat summary of what they owed me, complete with wire instructions and a closing paragraph that called it a gracious transition with respect and appreciation for years of service. Tacked onto the end was a separate document, thinly veiled under the heading Post-Engagement Terms. Translation: a non-disclosure agreement. They wanted silence. Wanted the story to end neatly, without footnotes, without precedent. I declined. Legally, I wasn't obligated, and morally, I wasn't interested. I signed only what the contract required. Nothing more, nothing less. Let them explain the payout however they needed to: legacy bonus, strategic exit, evolution of role. The truth was already logged, time-stamped, and quietly circulating in every department where someone wondered if they'd be next. They thought I'd want closure. What I wanted was accuracy. They called it grace, I called it arithmetic. It slipped in like a shadow, buried halfway through Calderon Aerospace's Q2 filings under a section titled Human Capital Reallocations. No bolded font, no footnote circus, just a single sentence in line 7C that said everything while pretending to say nothing. Separation reclassified to employer-initiated due to procedural oversight. No name, no role, no reference to the clause, the cost, or the cleanup required to make it all go away. But for anyone who knew the structure of those filings, who could decode the language behind corporate compliance masks, that sentence screamed louder than a press release. I didn't gloat. I didn't post a thing. Just screenshotted the line and tucked it into my archive right next to the resignation letter, the one with 10 words that detonated a 6-figure landmine under their Q2 cost center. Later that afternoon, I got a message from Marcus in legal, same friend who'd tipped me off when the CFO went pale. Line 7C, he wrote. That one sentence cost more than the last 2 restructures combined. I didn't send a paragraph, just a thumbs up emoji and the word understood. No need to relitigate it. The point had been made. I passed by the frame that hung in my hallway, matte black, no embellishments. Inside it, a crisp printout of my resignation, 1 line, dated, signed. I hereby resign, effective upon final settlement of all contractual and compensation obligations. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it was permanent. Every time they ran payroll, filed equity adjustments, or tried to quietly reinvent realignment, there I'd be, just beneath the surface, an expensive reminder of what happens when you underestimate the person who wrote the protocols. They tried to edge me out quietly. I exited on my terms, louder than they ever intended, and costlier than they'll ever admit.